Okay, I'm going to talk you through this problem just like I would do it or I did it initially. So we're supposed to factor and use only positive exponents. So I think back in P4, you looked at all the various different kinds of factoring. And so I look at this as grouping. And so I'm going to look at this blue group as a group and then this green as a group. So I know you all probably know this, but just as a review, say you had a simple problem like 2x squared plus 6x. The first thing you always want to look for is a GCF. You want to try to get the greatest common factor. And so in this case, this easier problem would have a 2 and an x in common. And so then what we would have left, if you distribute the 2x times x would give you that first term. And then 2x plus 3 would give you that second term. So remember factoring, if you're working backwards, it's really kind of like the opposite of distributing. So in this harder problem, when I did it initially, I actually didn't get the greatest common factor because I was focused in on this piece right here. So notice that both groups have a 3x plus 1 in common, but we have to determine 3x plus 1 to what power? Well, they both have a 3x plus 1 to the 1/3 power. And why is that? Well, that goes back to your exponent rules. So when you think about, I'm going to go over here. When you think about your simple exponent rules, like let's say x to the second times x to the third. If we were simplifying that, when you have the same base, you keep the base and you add those exponents. So that would be x to the 5th. So what we can say is in this second group, we're going to be able to break apart the 3x plus 1 to the 4/3 as 3x plus 1 to the 1/3 times 3x plus 1 to the 3/3, because the base here is the 3x plus 1. So when you're multiplying by the same base, keep the base, add the exponents. So that's why this is it's actually not the total GCF, but it is definitely a common factor. So I started with that 3x plus 1 to the 1/3. Saying that, then I'm like, okay, what's left over? I've got the 4 and I have the 2x minus 1. So if I were to distribute this right now, right, I would get what I started with in that first group. Then I looked at my second group. What am I missing? Well, I'm definitely missing that plus 2. And then this is where I would write that 3x plus 1 to the 3/3. Now, we wouldn't really have to write it as 3/3, but I wanted to show you this is what you're really looking at. Because if you were to distribute this 3x plus 1 to the 1/3, you're going to get that second group. Now, then what I did is I kept my 3x plus 1 to the 1/3, that common factor, and then I started simplifying my big old bracket. So this was pretty easy. I just distributed this 4 so I could look at things a little better, and that was 8x minus 4. And then I noticed what is really 3/3. That's really just to the first power. So the 3/3, I can just drop that, right? And so I'm just distributing a 2, and that's going to give me a positive 6x plus 2. Now I still need to simplify that bracket, that big hard bracket. So I'm just collecting like terms. 8x plus 6x is 14x. And then we have a negative 4 plus 2, which is your minus 2. Now notice that big bracket. This is where I just wanted to show you when you're factoring, a lot of times, I mean, yes, if I would have noticed in the beginning there's a bigger GCF, maybe that would have been helpful, but there's not necessarily just one way that you factor, as long as you notice things that need to keep going. So notice right here in this, when I say right here, I'm talking about right there, 14x minus 2. Notice that bracket has a GCF of 2. So since I'm factoring, I'm supposed to factor completely, even though it didn't say that. In Algebra 2, you'll always factor completely. So this would be, if I factor it out of 2, it'd be 2 times the quantity, 7x minus 1. Now I can't forget about the original factor that I pulled out. So now this is really my answer, but we don't typically write it that way. So you would want to make sure that you bring that 2 out in front. And then here it really doesn't matter which parentheses you put first. It could have been the 7x minus 1 and then the 3x plus 1 raised to the 1/3, but this is going to be your final answer. Now, in the beginning, so that's how I did it. That's what I wanted you to know. In the beginning, if I would have recognized that you have a 4 and a 2, you could have pulled out a 2 at the beginning. Sometimes it is harder to do that way because numbers get lost and things like that. So when I'm dealing with like a super complicated problem like this, I really focus on that 3x plus 1 to the 1/3 first, and then I just make sure each of my parentheses are fully simplified. Okay, I know that was kind of a long video.